Hello everyone, and welcome back to what is an absolutely fantastic dev diary today. The subject matter is something that I don't think anybody was asking for, but now that we have it, is very much appreciated, and that's going to be joint focus trees. Now I could sit here and try to explain it in a preview, but I think it's best we just go straight into the dev diary and explain it from there. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, this dev diary begins with Carlo, who I think is the brainchild of everything that we're seeing here today, who tells us this exciting new feature is perhaps the first one to be made with multiplayer in mind. Maybe more specifically, co-op multiplayer. The introductory preamble describes the scenarios that you may encounter when playing with friends, where each of you will have focus trees that require you to annex the surrounding lands, such as when they describe like the Baltics with Lithuania wanting to unite them, but Poland maybe wants to form Poland-Lithuania, and everything kind of overlaps, because the main way to grow in Hoi 4 is primarily revolved around expanding early. To combat the fact that miners require so much early expansion to be relevant, they've come up with a new strategy for multiplayer involving a joint focus tree. This will be specifically regarding the Nordics, as is the DLC's focus. With that, we can initially start by looking at what the focus tree is. So at the top here, we've got an introductory branch, and this is going to be shared by all of the nations. So Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark all have access to this tree. I think the initial one is just getting you closer together, but should you form the Nordic Council or whatever relevant faction is involved, all of these focuses become available to everyone. Moving on, we see the very focusing question, this time called Form the Kalmar Union, in which, to whomever creates it, will create the faction the Kalmar League, and also get a nice national spirit called the Kalmar League Leader, giving you insane political power gain, and some nice support at the end. I know it's perhaps a little early for some critique, but considering we're on the focus currently, I see no better time. So the idea is that any of the 4 Nordic nations can take this focus tree, but whoever takes this focus is going to be the one who becomes the faction leader, right? I do wonder if there's going to be some, competition or priority to decide who becomes the leader, or is it just going to be effectively just a race to see whoever can complete the focus the fastest? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the AI is effectively never going to complete this focus, so that shouldn't screw you, but perhaps in let's say a multiplayer lobby with a bunch of randoms, you may want to be aware that somebody could be going for this focus faster than you and steal away the faction. But anyway, back to the dev diary. So they begin by showing off joint military exercises as a very basic example, showing that to whichever country takes this focus, the one who actually goes through the time to complete it, will get the nice buff of 80 army experience and 2 75% research bonuses for the land doctrine. So as you see here, that's going to be Norway, and every other member of the faction, so Sweden, Denmark and Finland, are going to be getting a slightly reduced 60 army XP and completely missing out on 1 land doctrine only at 50%. The point here being, to whomever completes the focuses will be getting a better version of the focuses buffs than every other country, but every country will be getting buffed. It is also important to note that there are requirements for these focuses, specifically in this case, 90k manpower in divisions in the field and more than 20 divisions. So if you haven't really built up a relatively decent sized army with 20 divisions, you might struggle, but getting those numbers out shouldn't be too difficult. They go on to say, and this is really very, very good, is that as the focuses are all being completed, you can actually see everybody completing different focuses. Let's just take a closer look. So in this situation, we can see that Sweden is doing Nordic electronics. I think that's Denmark doing develop resources. And I'm not sure what that is. Is that supposed to be Finland, one presumes, doing railway expansion? And then over here, we are doing Royal Arms factories. So this is a really good new UI, which I think is the point of these stars that you're seeing around the side of the focuses here to indicate that these are shared focuses. And now you have a little icon to tell you who's doing it. On this topic, I'd like to take a brief detour and say this mechanic reminds me very much of a mod, and that mod is going to be Millennium Dawn. Ah yes, so here we are inside Millennium Dawn, one of the most famous Hearts of Iron 4 mods, and one mechanic that this seems so familiar to is going to be the European Union mechanic. So here, this is effectively a joint focus tree, where any member of the European Union can actually work towards completing these focuses. As a result, the entire European Union becomes stronger from it, and I think that on one hand, it's good to see that these core mechanics are going into the base game, but on the other hand, I hope that the Millennium Dawn team take advantage of the fact that now there is effectively an established base game mechanic for them to streamline this entire process, which in its current form it's a little bit janky, and goodness me, the design of it is so chaotic, isn't it? Goodness. Back into the world of the dev diary though, we see an affirmation of what I said earlier about different focus tree branches becoming more difficult if you don't specialise into them. So here we see the Northern Navy's Coordination Committee, in which there's a requirement to have at least 25 ships. So unless you're going to be spamming out some very cheap submarines, it's probably best to leave one of the other nations like Sweden, perhaps Denmark, to prioritise getting this one done. Okay, we're making some good progress down this dev diary, so now they want to talk about the nature of the joint focus tree, because it also has another interesting implementation. Depending on your ideological aims, there are actually 3 different versions of this focus tree to complete, and we begin with the Nordic Council. So at its core, it pretty much looks the same, although a lot of the icons have changed. They're all blue, as we can see here, and the main focus of this is going to be a democratic faction based around building up the economies and unity of the entire faction to make it as strong as possible. You might also notice as we go through that it's in the political cooperation branch at the bottom that you will find the most changing focuses. So in this case we're heading towards a Nordic Prime Parliament. But what do the others have in store? So in this instance we have the Northern People's Union, as we see here, forming the Northern People's Union with some red artwork instead of blue. And the central path is about a Northern Federation working towards a Politburo, with big focuses on getting tons of manpower to establish a grand marching army to liberate the world. Also maybe something to do with some atomic power down here, just maybe something to keep an eye on. And finally, I think this one is going to be arguably the most popular one, the Kalmar League, in memory of the Kalmar Union. Here we see what is going to be the monarchist path of forming a faction with, to my mind at least, the best looking focus art with the little crowns on top, and it's yellow. And its central path involves lots of duchies and things. So we've got the Grand Duchy of the Sea, a nice conclave, and a Duchy of the Air Force, interestingly. Even something towards creating the Kalmar nobility. Very interesting. So in total, we now see that the joint focus tree branch is actually quite malleable, with its icons changing, its structure changing, the focus is changing, and they'd say that this is going to be something they're explaining in a future dev diary in regards to modding. So yeah, some cool stuff in the future for some Hoi 4 mods. The next section of the dev diary is going to be going through some of the different branches they have in this joint focus tree. In total, we have Air Force, Navy, Army, Civilian Production, Research, Military Production, and a political branch in the centre that changes depending on your faction, as we discussed earlier. They take the time to explain specifically that in the Communist faction version, as you move down, you'll eventually unlock something called capstone selectors, which are actually very interesting. In short, when somebody completes a capstone selector, if you will actually unlock 4 extra focuses at the end of that specific branch, in addition to the focuses you already have. So it's kind of like you're specializing into a branch of something, and you unlock an even bigger focus tree if you go into that branch. Not huge, of course, only 4 focuses, but the concept itself I think is really quite cool. In the case of the NPU, in the event that you have to choose between the civilian economy or the military economy, if you choose to go down the military economy, you'll unlock 4 new focuses at the bottom of the military branch, here starting with central training developments and ending in joint special forces. So again, this is seeming like another great concept. It's really interesting to me that, these focus trees are, from what we saw, initially I thought they were quite small in some regards, but now you add this on top, this feels like it's its own entire separate mechanic, that you're getting in addition to the focus trees that we've already previewed for historical. So I don't know, I think this is really turning out to look quite good. We move on to see that once you've completed your preview set of 4 focuses, you can actually get another capstone choice, and this time it's between research and military production, and in the research branch we're looking at some rocketry and eventually a Nordic university. So on and on it goes. It's not just 4, you could get to 8, maybe to 12. I don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes. The final part of the dev diary talks about the very top of the focus tree, which is perhaps a bit odd. Usually we start with the top and work our way down, but in this case we're not. So this is the introductory part to eventually forming the Nordic Council, or whatever the faction is going to be called, which is primarily involved about opening up the diplomatic relations for you to be able to get going on forming a faction. Of course, you don't necessarily have to work towards forming a faction. You could just take advantage of the positive diplomatic relations between the Nordics to help stop any aggressors, or send out some volunteers, or just strengthen ties in general. So, completing the first focus, reaching out to our neighbours. I don't like the fact that there's not enough capital letters in here. Just a personal gripe. I feel like neighbours could have had a capital N, but that's just me. Doing so will unlock a series of decisions, including, for example, promote Nordic unity, which for 45 days gives you some, well, that's just ridiculous, frankly, those buffs. Why are they so strong? Tons of political power, way too much stability, and on a milder sense, some improved relations maintaining cost. I guess this is just to help you improve the relations of all of the different members of the faction before you initially send out the "would you like to join a faction?" Moving on from there, we have industrial cooperation, unlocking decisions to improve your economy and the economy of a neighbour in equal terms. So in this case, we have Nordic investments, whereby using your factories, you can give some to your allies. In this case, we're giving free civs to Sweden to really help build them up, which again is going to be super useful for multiplayer. You know, if you have a friend and they're really working towards building something, you can actually just give them free civs for 60 days to help them on their way. It almost makes me think this could be like a baked-in mechanic into your diplomatic menu. You know, along with like improved relations and stuff, you could have another one which is just like invest civs, and you have like a bar between 1 to 10, and depending on how many civs you send over, maybe it has like a political power cost, and if you get below 0 political power, it cancels it out. So you can actually choose to invest in your allies. Just a thought, obviously would need balancing, but it's such a good mechanic, because in its current form, the way we do it is by requesting licenses from people to give them civs, which I always think is kind of funny. Next up, we have mutual guarantees, and again, it's going to give you a decision. In this case, it's about making the ties between your nations closer, which is good if you're hoping to one day form a gigafaction. They also note that if you're of different ideologies, strengthening the ties is going to involve sharing each other's ideology with each other, so maybe something to keep an eye on in case you're working with somebody who isn't to your mindset. Side note, we do have a democratic faction, a communist faction, and a monarchist faction. We don't have a fash faction. I guess the fash paths literally just involve conquering everyone. There is no middle ground. There is no alliances to be found there. Just an interesting thought. The final two focuses they want to talk about is To Arms Against Tyranny and the Nordic March. So To Arms Against Tyranny is effectively going to be a expanded volunteer capacity focus to help you help your fellow Nordic friends if they're being, for example, invaded by the Soviets. In that case, you'll be able to send weapons to Finland, send volunteers to Finland, and maybe even join the war against the Soviets and save Finland. And with that, that ends this week's Dev Diary. So what can I say? I think this has been a fantastic preview of what is going to come. It completely opens up what I think to be the most important thing in focus trees, and that's going to be sub-branches about entirely independent mechanics. I always said that, you know, one of my favorite focus trees in the game is Poland because it has the Midzymorze faction path on its own. It has a government in exile path on its own. And I think these kind of things are literally what makes some focuses and some countries the best to play. TLDR, I'm even more excited for Arms Against Tyranny after this Dev Diary, and I'm very excited to see what our hero is going to show us with some diverse cool things next week. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for watching. Goodness knows what else they've got to show us. I guess we're going to find out very soon. I hope to see you there. If you liked, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I hope to see you next week. Bye!